And welcome back. So more than 120 charities are accused of wasting money from donations on woke, unconscious bias training for staff, which the government recently, thankfully, said, no, we don't really believe in this critical race theory, and unconscious bias training simply doesn't work, following on from the lead from the US with Trump, so good on them. But first, just a bit of a reality check from Dr. Sarah Chan out of Edinburgh University, warning of fundamental ethical concerns over vaccine passports, and says they risk creating false sense of security because the idea is the 85% effective, the vaccines, depending on whose statistics you believe and which vaccine you're talking about and what the precautions have been taken in administering them in the first place, and so many different factors that in the end I think the official line is to say 85% after 2 doses, slightly above having actually contracted COVID yourself. So that's nice, I suppose. So, vaccine passports, they're not fully effective, of course. Saying it's a false sense of security, that you think, oh, it's going to be fine, you don't need to quarantine, but no, they might have actually contracted the coof again, in which case you're going to be swept through with another pandemic. Or, if they suddenly all work, what a coincidental miracle, now the Biden's in. The pushback from this, from Professor Dominic Wilkinson from Oxford, believes papers could open up some travel options, and it says, follow scientists saying the vaccine passports allowing holidays are feasible. Their main argument is, we're aware that there might be a risk and they're not as effective as they could be, but it feels like the right thing to do, doesn't it? It just feels like we'll be fine if we do it. And seeing if it feels good to do it, then that's what we should do. Which I think pretty much explains the dichotomy of how this has become politicized as well. And that is very peculiar, seeing surely when it gets down to science and basing things on empirical evidence, that is, you would have thought, the last bastion where we don't really care about what feels right. Instead, we're all about peer review and repeating experiments in order to reach the accurate conclusion, and yet it seems to be penetrating into there as well. But, speaking of politics penetrating itself into too many aspects, charities, yes. And who are among these charities? Alzheimer's UK, the Alzheimer's Society, Parkinson's UK, and the Red Cross. Of all the places for unconscious bias training, to me, the Red Cross is someone that I am very, very ashamed to hear that they have gone down that route. Someone that is supposed to be representing decades of support around the world for fallen soldiers as well, and yet, but what about unconscious bias? And I'm thinking, don't you have more important things to focus on when you're dealing with emergencies happening right in front of your eyes and delivering aid as quickly as possible to people in need? Of course, the same goes to supporting people with Alzheimer's and Parkinson's. Yes, of course. But it's not a thing where somebody might bleed out in 5 minutes if you don't get to them. That kind of thing. So, to me, seeing that they've decided to spend their money this way is, so it's not endorsed by the British government, at least. So we'll get that out of the way, and that's a positive. It is unfortunate that larger charities seem to go this way. If you look up the salaries of the CEOs, for want of a better word, for bigger charities, and then started questioning exactly why they're being paid so much for running a charity, that, sure, it's a business of sorts, and you have got to generate revenue, and you have got to manage people in order for it to go places, but if you're running a charity, that's not the same as other forms of business, really, is it? Surely you're not thinking of getting involved in charities in order to get rich. You're thinking of getting involved in charities in order to provide help for other people. And it's not as if you're providing a service to other people and therefore earning your money in that regards. It's far more nefarious and misleading if you're skimming off the top, taking from a charity and from people's donations, as it is essentially mis-selling if you were to put it that way. And then to see that on top of that, they just decide to buy into political wokeness without really understanding that where this leads is to take them out as well. They are the wealthy 1%, if you will. So the ice pick will come for them next. And I do understand that the whole idea of identity politics, mainstream in the West, really goes back to Occupy Wall Street. Say, oh, the bankers concerned that there's a bit of an uprising and peasants revolt against them. And therefore they think, well, hey, how about we divide and conquer by just trying to get as much infighting as possible. And therefore just pick something stupid and, oh, what's this? They seem to be noticing that they've got different skin colours and ethnicities, and now they're mentioning historic oppression. Yep, let's encourage that, let's run with that, because that will be the big distraction, the big movement, to hide the small movement of all of us getting away scot-free following the Wall Street crash of 2008. Let's ignore all the policies that allowed subprime loans, and let's ignore all the banks that went along with it and just tried to hide it in other packages in order to get it off their books and then losing track of exactly where they were. Let's just ignore all that and instead focus on internalized misogyny and systemic oppression and racism and these buzzwords, so that these groups will tear themselves apart instead of going after the people responsible for creating the mess in the first place. So yes, we see that time and time again, but big business owners, even if they're charity owners, don't be fooled into thinking that distraction will stay forever. We're already seeing the left eat their own, and I know it's peculiar when they're pushing so hard and yet it seems to be a big front with not a lot of support behind it. And that kind of just goes to speak about the liberal ideology compared to the conservative ideology, that the idea is to have a balance between the two, that you've got tradition and then you've got adventure, that if you're too traditional and conservative in the truest sense of the word, then you are just holding yourself back, you're not really growing, you're becoming stagnant, as we see with the Conservative Party, not pushing back, not trying to gain ground or anything like that, just trying to hold on to what is there, and that's it. Meanwhile, the left are spreading themselves out, and the risk would be to spread yourself out too thin, and therefore you can't get your resources around to all of the individuals, and you die out because of that, because you've decided to be a bit too adventurous and you've lost your supply chain. And that's what we're seeing with the leftist movement at the moment, that it's a big front, and they are pushing hard, but the support behind them is falling apart as they're being a bit too accelerationist. And that, to me, is the understanding of support for the accelerationist movement, and why businesses going down this route to try and placate the left now isn't a good idea, because it is just feeding fuel to the fire of the, I suppose, almost more moderate types, which then garners more support, suggesting that it is acceptable, in order to bring more people to the movement and indoctrinate it further to the left until they come after the big business bosses themselves. So if you wish to go down the accelerationist movement, then you need to push hard left and make a mockery of it as you do it, not kind of support it tacitly and allow it to run rampant, because it will come for you next. But are people taking this well? No, they're not. Does this mean a drop in contributions? Well, it certainly does if this story gets bigger attention. So if you do wish to help these causes, what are your options? Local charities. But isn't it nice that we have a choice of places we can send our money to? And if we do not appreciate how the money is being spent, then we can choose to donate elsewhere instead. We can choose to patronise other businesses and support other endeavours. However, of course, if there's a government mismanaging a health crisis and a health service, you can't go anywhere else. So there's a nice little distinction there. So yeah, they're just as bad as each other. Difference is, with these charities, you can pick a different one to donate to. But you can't pick a different health service to donate your taxes to. But that's it from me. Let me know what you guys think down below about both of these things. About, is this going to affect the charities at all, or is this just going to be memory hold and swept under the rug and nobody's really going to notice or care, providing that most people don't really know what unconscious bias training is, and therefore, it's going to help out in support for the people who are aware of this, and the people who wouldn't like it don't really know what unconscious bias training is. However, the left are far less charitable than the right, so they might be shooting themselves in the foot with this, given their ideal client base. And then, of course, vaccine passports. Let's say they even try to go ahead with them. Would they be effective, given how unreliable the vaccines are? Or ineffective, as they're not 100%? Or would this just magically work, as it just disappears, now that the orange man is gone, one way or another? Let me know down below. And as always, until next time, have a good one.